Hey folks, it's sunshine and we are out here at this amazing lake. Absolutely incredibly perfect day today. We got some good bass and some good trout in that lake. We're going to be going fishing here real soon. But while I'm here enjoying the day, let's record the rest of chapter 10 and then we're going to get real close to being done. So, chapter 10, part 2, entering highest tantric practice. The process of dying. When the totality of one's enlightened nature is realized, the Dharmakaya, Sambhogakaya, and Nirmanakaya are achieved simultaneously. But in terms of tantric practice, these three kayas, or bodies, gradually evolve in a sequence mirroring the natural unfolding of death, the intermediate state, and rebirth. So as was indicated earlier, first we should understand how the process of death and so forth ordinarily occurs. Then we can understand how they are transformed into three bodies of enlightenment. Death is the separation of mind from the body. This separation may take place over several hours or days, as is generally the case in a death from natural causes, or it may happen rather more suddenly, as in an accident. But in either case, there are certain definite stages in the dying process. The body does not lose its ability to maintain consciousness all at once, but does so gradually with each element of the body, earth, water, fire, and air, losing its supportive ability in turn. The Tantric texts dealing with the dying process describe the first 4 stages of death in vivid terms. They say that first the earth elements sink or dissolves in the water element, and that then the water element sinks into the fire, and the fire into the air, and the air element into consciousness itself. Such a description is useful for meditation, but should not be taken literally. For example, when it is said that the earth element sinks, quote unquote, into the water element, this means that as the solid portions of the body are gradually losing their ability to function and are becoming less intimately interconnected with the dying person's mind, the liquid elements appear stronger and more evident. As these various physical elements become stronger and weaker in turn, the dying person experiences certain external and internal signs associated with each stage of the dissolution process. As these signs are listed in great detail in other texts, it is not necessary to mention them all here. However, it will be helpful to point out some of the visions that typically occur. When ordinary people die, they are out of control. Because they have not trained themselves during their life, they are overwhelmed by the experience of death and bewildered as their bodily elements go out of balance and cease functioning harmoniously. It seems to them as if they were in the middle of a violent earthquake, and it is therefore very difficult, if not impossible, for them to remain calmly aware of what is happening. Death is thus experienced as a series of frightening hallucinations, a nightmarish disaster. Yet for someone who is prepared, the same visions that cause panic in others can bring an extraordinary peace. And for those advanced practitioners who have trained their minds well, each stage of the dissolution process brings ever-increasing clarity and insight. According to Buddhist psychology, whether an object brings satisfaction or not depends upon a decision made beforehand by your consciousness. Even before you see a particular thing, your mind has already decided, this will make me happy. Then when you actually contact it with your eyesight, you think, oh, this is very nice. The same is true for a negative reaction. If your consciousness has already decided that you do not like a certain person, then when you actually meet him, you will see nothing but an unpleasant person. In other words, all the seemingly real good things that we like and bad things that we dislike are in fact creations of our own mind. How is all of this related to our death experiences? Buddhism teaches that the way to experience both a happy life and a happy death is by recognizing exactly what is happening without being misled and confused by appearances. During our life, we experience one dissatisfaction after another because we mistakenly believe that what appears to us as good or bad truly exists in this way. We therefore spend all our time and energy running after this and away from that. During our lifetime, we build up such a strong habit of relating to things in this alternatingly greedy and fearful way that it is only to be expected that at the time of our death, when everything seems to be falling apart, we will be overwhelmed by great confusion. The solution is to learn to see all things as mere appearances to the mind, as lacking even one atom of independent self-existence. We need to understand that, in this respect, all things are like illusions. The same understanding should be applied to the visions that appear one after another as our consciousness goes through the dying process. We should become familiar with what to expect when we die so that we can deal with these illusions instead of being overwhelmed and confused by them. The key during both life and death is to recognize illusions as illusions, projections as projections, and fantasies as fantasies. In this way, we become free. Death and Dharmakaya. First of all, let us consider what might happen to us if, totally untrained and unprepared, we were to die in a state of great anxiety and bewilderment. Desperately holding tightly on to supposedly solid sense of I for security, we panic at the basis of our ego identity. Our body itself begins to disintegrate. As the earth element of our body deteriorates and the water element seems to grow stronger, our mind is filled with the hallucination of a shimmering silver-blue mirage. We feel trapped and suffocated, as if our body were buried in the earth or caught in an avalanche. Then the water element sinks into the fire element, and a vision of swirling smoke appears. As this is happening, we may feel as if we are drowning or being carried away by violent currents of water. Next, the fire element dissolves and our body gradually grows colder. We perceive a vision like that of sparks dancing over an open fire at night. During this process, some dying people cry out, thinking that their body is being consumed by flames. Finally, the air element dissolves. Our breathing grows shallow, and we may feel that we are being blown about like a leaf in the wind. Along with this experience comes the vision of a dying flame in a darkened room. As is the case when a candle is about to go out, the flame suddenly grows brighter, as if exploding in a final burst of energy. Our breathing, which has been getting more and more difficult, now comes to a complete halt. To the outside world, we now seem to be dead, and this is often the signal for those gathered around us to burst into tears. But we are not dead yet. The four gross elements and the conceptual minds associated with them have ceased to function, but there remain subtle levels of consciousness still to be absorbed. This happens as the subtle white drop received from our Father at conception and located during our life in the crown of our head, and the red drop received from our mother and located at our navel come toward each other and eventually meet at the level of our heart. As the white drop descends, we perceive a vision of empty space pervading by whiteness. And as the red drop rises, we perceive a similar vision of empty space, this time pervaded by redness. Finally, the two drops meet, forming a sphere enclosing our very subtle, fundamental consciousness and its associated wind at our heart, and we experience the blackness of a completely darkened room. This darkness becomes blacker and blacker until we eventually fall into total unconsciousness, but still we are not dead. Within this sphere at our heart center resides our very subtle consciousness and its associated subtle energy wind. After some time, which can be as long as 3 days, even for an untrained person, this sphere opens and our mind is illuminated. The very subtle mind awakens and nothing appears to it but the vision of empty space, clear and luminous. This clear light consciousness is the last and most subtle of all the states of mind experienced during this lifetime. For an ordinary person, all these absorptions, from the appearance of the mirage-like visions to the dawning of the clear light, are uncontrolled. They happen one after the other, but we are barely conscious of them. Our mind is so confused and distracted. But those who have trained themselves well beforehand maintain clear awareness of everything that is happening during this process. They know which vision will come next and understand that everything they are perceiving is merely an appearance to their dying mind, and empty of all independent self-existence as something truly out there. Because of this understanding, they are not frightened by what they see. Instead, as their mind grows more and more subtle, their awareness of the emptiness of true existence becomes more and more penetrating. Finally, with the arising of the clear light, this very subtle mind mixes indistinguishably with emptiness in an experience of inexpressible bliss. For such a person, death has become the precious opportunity for perfecting the wisdom of non-duality. By means of this clear and unobstructed wisdom, the trained practitioner has transformed the ordinary death process into the enlightened Dharmakaya experience. The Dharmakaya experience of non-duality is beyond words, beyond expression, beyond concepts. When someone speaks about this experience, therefore, there is always the danger of being misinterpreted. So you should not trust my words. They are only the false words of my superstition. No matter how skillful they may be, words still come from the limited conceptual mind and are understood by the same limited mind. What is necessary is to touch the experience itself and thus go beyond the words used to describe it. That is why Tantra puts such emphasis upon action rather than theory. Although it is a good thing to study the various Buddhist texts and commentaries and learn to analyze them with a sharp and critical intelligence, we should understand that there are times when this analytical approach is actually harmful. One of my meditation masters once told me, at a certain point you have to abandon the philosophical way of understanding things. You must go beyond debate, beyond argument. That shocked me. I was a young, enthusiastic student at the time and liked to analyze and criticize everything I heard, but I eventually understood what he meant. Remaining caught up in intellectual preconceptions can prevent us from entering profound meditational experiences. So it is important to know when to relax, let go, and allow the mind to settle into its natural state of clarity. Truly qualified masters of all traditions always stress that there are certain times when you should not be doing analytical or intellectual activity at all. For instance, it would be a great mistake to engage in analytical thought during the advanced completion stage practices of highest yoga tantra. Why? Because when you use your intellect, it is natural for all sorts of superstitious concepts to arise. Your mind becomes overly busy and vibrates with the fragmented energy of such concepts. Then, since every state of mind is associated with its own wind energy, your subtle nervous system will also become busy vibrating with various conflicting wind energies. This not only interferes with the control you are trying to gain over your nervous system through these completion stage practices, but it can also easily lead to a painful condition that Tibetans call lung, meaning frustrated energy at the heart. As with all aspects of the spiritual path, there is a time to use the intellect and there is a time to put it aside. Excuse me. Bardo and Sambhogakaya. For ordinary people, once the clear light is finished, the mind experiences the visions of the Dharmakaya experience just described, but in a reverse order, from the darkness of unconsciousness to the mirage-like vision. When the beginning of this reverse process, our mind departs from our body and death actually occurs. Immediately thereafter, we enter the intermediate state, the Bardo, and here again our mind is completely out of control. With the speed of thought, we are propelled from one situation to another as in a dream, but this dream is more often a nightmare. Sometimes terrifying visions, arising from the imprint of our past delusions and negative actions, appear and cause us to run away in fear. At other times, luring visions arise and we run after them with intense craving, only to be disappointed. This is what happened, after all, when we were still alive and possessed an ordinary physical body. Our life was spent in a constant search for security, running away from this and after that. But now our situation is even more extreme. Because our insubstantial Bardo body is made of nothing but subtle wind energy. It can pass through matter without any obstruction, and therefore we enter without hindrance into whatever situation our fearful, craving mind throws us. This is the ordinary Bardo experience, but once again, trained practitioners can transform it into the path to enlightenment. Well versed in the practices of the rainbow-like illusory body, once the clear light of death comes to an end, they assume a clear, radiant body of light instead of the diluted Bardo body. In this way, they transform the ordinary Bardo into the enlightened Sambhogakaya, or enjoyment body experience. Rebirth and Nirmanakaya. Okay. Rebirth and Nirmanakaya. Just as the ordinary process of death and Bardo are uncontrolled, compelled by the force of our deluded grasping, so too is our ordinary rebirth. We are eventually blown by the winds of our deluded actions, karma, to wherever our future parents lie in sexual embrace. There, with our mind experiencing a confused mixture of longing, desire, and repulsion, we faint and are therefore conceived in our mother's womb. From this impure beginning of life, full of impurity and suffering, follows. Our body, deriving from the sperm and egg of our parents, is subject to the miseries of birth, sickness, aging, and eventually death, while our mind, as a stream flowing from our precious life, continues under the compulsion of insecure craving, repulsion, and ignorance to create the causes for further dissatisfaction and suffering. This ordinary rebirth experience can be transformed by the skilled practitioner in the same way that death and Bardo are transformed. Instead of moving from the Bardo to the next life under the force of insecurity and grasping, ignorantly falling into unconsciousness, the well-trained followers of Tantra can choose their rebirth consciously. Having trained themselves in the practice of overcoming ordinary appearances, they can see their future parents as male and female deities and themselves as a deity as well. Depending on their level of control and the type of training they have completed, they may even take rebirth in a pure land, a state of existence in which everything is conducive to the attainment of enlightenment. Even if they are born on this earth, they can choose a situation suitable to spiritual development so that they can continue to practice until the totality of enlightenment is reached. With such full awareness and complete control over their next life, ordinary rebirth can be transformed into the enlightened experience of the Nirmanakaya, or emanation body. This has been only a brief account of what the Tantric practitioners can transform ordinary death, Bardo, and rebirth into the three bodies of enlightened being. But it is enough to give us a clear idea of what lies at the heart of the highest Tantric practice. Up until now, we have been overwhelmed by the forces of ignorance, karma, and our many delusions, with the result that we have been going around in a circle of birth, death, and rebirth without choice or control over and over again. Until we replace our ignorance with wisdom and transform these three recurring events into enlightened experience of a Buddha, we will continue going around in this vicious circle forever, searching for happiness but finding only disappointment. Cutting rebirth. It is not difficult to understand how ordinary death, Bardo, and rebirth experiences are the root of our difficulties. Because we live and die and are reborn with an uncontrolled mind and body, we have to experience the mental and physical sufferings of ordinary life. Stated simply, if we are not born in the first place, there would not be no way for these problems to arise. Through the practice of highest Tantra, we can avoid such a birth and all its problems completely. Some people might be confused when hearing that the proper practice of Tantra can cut rebirth. What is the point of this? Why should I give up the chance to return to the world? Is this what the path is leading me to? Total non-existence? If so, I'm not interested. To avoid this confusion, we should realize that cutting rebirth has a very specific meaning, namely to free ourselves from having to experience uncontrolled rebirth again and again. We can practice Tantra successfully and still return to this world. In fact, our compassionate bodhicitta motivation makes it unthinkable that we would abandon others. It pledges us to return for their sake. Shakyamuni Buddha himself did so, and his birth, far after being a problem, was the source of limited benefit. At the moment, however, our rebirths take place without control and merely perpetuate the beginningless cycle of misery. This is what needs to be cut. The same is true for death and Bardo. It is the uncontrolled experience of these events that must be eliminated and transformed. Our uncontrolled life, in which the three poisons of attachment, anger, and ignorance play such a big part, leads inevitably to an uncontrolled death, during which these same delusions give rise to even greater confusion. Our mind is overwhelmed by the hallucinations associated with the dissolution of the various bodily elements, and we enter the intermediate state with tremendous fear and longing. There, because we possess a body of consciousness rather than one of gross physical form, our superstitions have an even stronger effect upon us. Each delusion that surfaces in our mind immediately throws us into a correspondingly deluded situation. This is an extremely frightening condition, and eventually, when we perceive the vision of our future parents, our longing for security propels us to take rebirth, and the cycle begins again. Nowhere is there any peace, rest or peace as the security and happiness we seek always eludes us. This is the symptom of our ordinary samsaric existence. The aim of tantric practice is to free ourselves from these recurring difficulties by helping us to break out of this vicious circle. By training our mind to overcome the tyranny of ordinary deluded appearances, and by preparing beforehand for what we must eventually encounter as one life draws to an end and another begins, we are generating the ability to substitute the enlightened experience of the three bodies of Buddha for the usual confusion of death, Bardo, and rebirth. All right, that was a good one. Chapter 11 next.